Welcome, everyone. On behalf of the Ad Club of New York and our sponsor and member company, Infillion, welcome to the virtual clubhouse. I'm Laurel Rossi, and I'm wearing two hats today as past president of the Advertising Club of New York and also as the Chief Marketing Officer of Infillion. For those of you who don't know, the Ad Club and the International Andy Awards are committed to keeping the marketing community connected wherever you are by providing hybrid content for the foreseeable future. And one benefit of COVID is that people from around the country tune into our events, and we welcome all of you. So thank you for joining us. This chat today is part of our Innovate New York series, where we provide an opportunity for communication professionals to learn about the latest technologies available to marketers today from those who are leading the charge. In today's episode, we'll focus on connected TV. And we're thrilled to have Ad Age editor Janine Poggi moderate the conversation, and featuring my colleague, president of Infillion Media, Krista Carone, from Dropbox, head of brand marketing, Danny Hussey, and my co-Ad Club board member, Disney's EVP Client Solutions and Addressable Enablement, Lisa Valentino. Before we get started, I want to encourage those of you who are not members of the club to join us. We provide resources that educate, celebrate, and empower our community. And you can do that easily by visiting the advertisingclub.org. Also on April 20th, we'll be having our next Conversation With program featuring Ad Club Board Chair Rick Song in discussion with board member Walter Geer, the Executive Creative Director of Experience Design at VML-Y&R. It will be live and virtual, so to sign up for this event, go to the club's website. Feel free to socialize information about today's session and tag us at Ad Club of New York. Now, please welcome me in joining my partner in crime, Krista Carone.
Thank you, Laurel. You do an amazing job wearing multiple hats. And thank you to the Ad Club for hosting today's conversation. Listen, certainly an hour doesn't go by when we're not all talking about, reading about, planning about, or actually watching CTV. So it's definitely a timely topic all the time. And while it does seem to be all of the hype, our industry loves to get wrapped up in the swirl of new platforms. I am pretty certain we've not exhausted all the nuances of the topic. As Laurel mentioned, I'm Krista Carone. I'm the president of Infillion Media, and I've been with the company for a whopping 6 months. And by company, I mean the convergence of several businesses and products that we've brought together under the Infillion brand to create a more modern approach to how we connect advertising and consumer experiences. Infillion is our new brand name, and we were born out of the infinite ways that marketers connect with consumers through an infinite number of data and engagement points. Many of you may be familiar with our flagship products, TrueX and Gimbal. And this week, we actually added even more ad innovation through the launch of AttentionX, which is built to bring the premium experience of value exchange to CTV and to brands of any size. So Infillion has really become this growing portfolio of ad and marketing technology. And we're doing that by applying some real world first party data to deliver both high impact and high performance advertising experiences, with a very maniacal focus on respecting consumers' time, attention, and privacy, which I know is something that we're going to dive a bit deeper into today in the context of CTV. I personally bring to this role and to our discussion today a background in digital media and social video and content, as well as some direct client experience from being a recovering CMO in big technology and financial services companies. So along with my colleagues from Dropbox and Disney, I'm really looking forward to this convo today. All CTV is not created equal, and how do we as marketers, as publishers, as media buyers, and as creators put the consumer first in the CTV experience? So we have lots to cover here, and I'm super grateful that we have Janine from Ad Age to guide us through the discussion. I'm sure many of us on the call today have read Janine's great work during her 10 years with Ad Age. I know her byline is always prominent in my feed. She oversees the pub's technology and media coverage, And Janine, I know you're gearing up for New Fronts and Upfront season. She also oversees the publication strategy for new editorial products and hosts Ad Age's remotely video series. So thank you so much, Janine, for taking time from your busy day to join us. And I will hand it over to you.
Thank you, Krista, and thank you for having me. Welcome everyone again. And just to echo a bit what Krista said, like it's certainly been an exciting time in the connected TV space. You know, the industry has really seen a profound shift in viewing from linear TV to streaming, and it's really creating an opportunity to truly upend the TV ad model for these platforms. And we are really just at the early stages of this transformation. So I'm eager to bring in Lisa and Danny to the Zoom stage as well, and Krista to spend some time discussing how brands can better leverage connected TV and really what's next for the viewing experience. Hi, Lisa. Hi, Danny.
Hi.
Good to see both of you.
How are you?
Good. So I don't think anyone here needs to be told that really there has been a move en masse to CTV, and the shift is only really expected to accelerate. Whether we want to talk about, you know, how COVID is a catalyst for some of this and the other factors that have contributed to viewing patterns, you know, we know that this is only going to continue. So given this, how do brands really need to prepare for more viewing moving from linear TV to streaming? And Krista, I thought maybe you can kick things off for us.
Yeah, thank you. You know, it's interesting to me as we have another format to try to balance the consumer experience around, and that we as marketers don't get overly comfortable in how we've programmed our advertising in the past, that every time a new platform emerges through the advancements of technology, to me, it's an opportunity for marketers to think about how we deliver an advertising experience in a much more innovative way. And the fact of the matter is that the streaming environment demands a much deeper connection between advertising and the consumer experience, and ultimately even bringing commerce into play. Part of what we're focused on is how do we start at a place that respects the consumer's time and their attention and their privacy before even introducing them to an advertising experience. So taking the data that we know about the viewer, but giving them the option to opt into an advertising experience in ways that are more organic to the overall viewing experience. So this whole point around consent, not only consenting to provide you with information that's private to me, but also consent for you to distract me from my viewing experience and interrupt my attention. I think as marketers, we should finally really put the viewer and the consumer first and build advertising experiences that are respectful of that attention. And my guess is, and we know it from the performance of our campaigns, we're going to get much higher levels of engagement and more performance from our marketing dollars.
Yeah, I mean, look, lower ad loads and ad formats like things like binge ads and pause ads, those have sort of become the staples in CTV at this point. Lisa, can you maybe talk about like what the next phase is in sort of differentiating the ad environment from linear TV? As Krista said, you know, it requires a different look and a different skill set to kind of take what we've traditionally done on TV and bring it to the streaming landscape.
Totally. Thanks for having me. By the way, this is such a powerhouse panel. So for anybody who is tuned in, you absolutely should join the ad club, because we spend a lot of time with folks like this on the screen, and just a great networking opportunity overall. That's my PSA for the ad club. As it relates to CTV, look, you know, when I look at our business at Hulu, it's actually a pretty mature business today. So I think we also have to recognize that this isn't new. This is actually, to a certain extent, you know, it's a decade-old plus business for a brand like Hulu and others. And AVOD, you know, when you look at some of the third-party sourcing in the market, the next 5 years of CTV growth is off the charts, and AVOD is fueling that. And so there's a majority of consumers that are raising their hand for AVOD services. And I think that's a really good indicator for all of the businesses that we represent, that consumers are expecting advertising in their premium content experiences, right? Now, to your point, Janine, what do we continue to do to make sure that that is an experience that is enhanced? And we absolutely believe consumer first experiences are the place to lean in. Thank you for the PSA on pause and binge. I think Hulu really led the way in viewer first experiences. And look, I think we're just getting started. I think, having the consumer as part of the conversation is step one. Because when you look at the type of content that is being consumed on CTV, it really crosses so many different types of genres. So to a certain extent, you have pause ads and binge ads that play into the behaviors, right? We just launched a year ago, Gateway Go, which is our version of commerce. And that is already starting to, I think, take off, and we'll probably all agree that that becomes a big part of non-disruptive ads. It also plays into the behavior that dominant behavior is multifaceted. So while folks are watching CTV, which is predominantly on a big screen, they have their mobile phone in use. And so that plays really well to commerce experiences. For us, we're also thinking a lot about movies and film, right? When the content that is on Hulu is our premium content that is, to a certain extent, entertaining on all of our linear networks as well. And so, but how do you create unique experiences? I think you saw at our data and tech showcase, really starting to think through, whether it's trivia before movies start, where you can play with your friends and communities, or breaks in the movie. I think we all remember the let's all go to the lobby type of old ways of thinking about just, again, how do you create custom experiences in different types of content that are being consumed.
Lisa, you mentioned bringing consumers into the experience to have them voice what they want to see. How do you do that? What is the way to sort of make sure that you're delivering what consumers expect?
Yeah, I mean, look, we do a ton of testing before we launch products. We have a pretty big panel base of streaming viewers that we are constantly surveying throughout the year. And that gives us an opportunity to ask very unique questions, either on behalf of advertisers or on behalf of our own, product innovation. The other thing I would say is, data is informing all of this. So, one of the benefits of CTV is all of the targetability that it provides, right? So we've got over, 1,800 ways you can target our users based on our own first-party data. That also creates really more relevant advertising experiences. It also gives us a ton of data on those users in terms of their psychographics, not just their demographics, and how that correlates to ad performance. So there's lots of different signals I think we take in that help inform sort of that ad innovation roadmap.
Yeah, and I definitely want to talk more about commerce, more about data as we go through this conversation. Danny, for Dropbox, is data a part of the thinking behind your investment in CTV? How is Dropbox evaluating the CTV marketplace?
Yes, absolutely. So I think, formerly we looked at CTV as really an extension of our linear buy. From an audience perspective, we knew that CTV would really give us that incremental reach that we needed to capture the cord cutters and nevers, which happens to be a large portion of our tech-heavy audience. So that was kind of our emphasis, I would say last year before, but we've really taken a step back to rethink the strategy of how do we actually make CTV a cornerstone of our buy and less of an incremental reach play. And knowing that this consumption is skyrocketing through the roof. And from a brand perspective, Dropbox has always been sort of a challenger brand where we actually can't compete in the linear space at that cost, right? So for us, we're starting to rethink, well, we have a larger opportunity to shift perception, get in front of these folks on CTV and do so in a very targeted, direct way. So I see this being a huge part of our strategy in ways that it hasn't been in previous years.
And Krista, can you talk a little bit about the audience targeting opportunities in CTV? What opportunities there are, for brands to really lean into as we talk about, the need for more data amid the demise of the cookie, like why CTV presents such an important area for targeting and reaching audiences in this way?
Sure. Yeah, I think there's still a lot for us to learn in this space too, but CTV definitely has the opportunity to be much more efficient as we look at the relevancy of our advertising investments, a little bit less mature and less beholden on the targeting products that are going to be heavily affected by new policies in a world without cookies. So what I think is fascinating about CTV is that we actually can be incorporating some real world signals, whether that's from foot traffic or behavioral context into our targeting, mobile use, viewing and interaction habits. There's going to be such a confluence of, back to Infillion, the infinite number of data sources that are both demo and geo and behavioral, that we really should be in a position where the relevancy of the message to the consumer is better than we have seen with any other platform. And then the onus is on us as marketers to make sure that the payoff is an engaging and an engaging creative experience so that message truly becomes actionable as well. If we can hit the relevancy point, the creative has to be the ultimate payoff.
So where are we now in that? Like, what is capable now? And what are we talking about? What is really more of a future endeavor, and how far out are we looking for some of the things that you mentioned?
Yeah, and I can start, and Lisa, you may want to jump in on this as well. With Infillion, because part of our broader ecosystem within the Infillion environment isn't just sophisticated and innovative advertising technology products, but also our consumer experience business, where we are able to extract place-based and location-based data that gives us a better sense of individuals' behaviors and apply that to the targeting in their CTV or media consumption experience. So if I know that you are a coffee drinker and stopped at a Starbucks in an airport, I can start to ascertain certain behaviors that get applied to our X graph or our DMP that can then be translated into the targeting that we're applying to CTV. As we're working with our publishing partners, then the opportunity is to make sure that that advertising is being delivered to the right viewer on the other side of the screen. And that's one of the real open areas there for us, especially as we get into more of an OTT environment, is understanding who's watching, why they're watching, and their video consumption behaviors during that viewing experience.
Yeah, I think, look, in some ways we're in the beginning at the ground level, and in some ways I think we've made such great progress over even just the last 3 to 5 years in this space. Janine, you know this well. We've invested in our first party data graph well ahead of what's happened in the industry over the last 2 years.
I remember talking about it initially, like
when was that? That feels like it was
truly thinking about, like, I don't understand. Like at the time, I'm like, I don't know what this means. And now it has certainly become clearer, but it was definitely several years ago. Right? You and I were talking. Like, I don't know. We didn't have a crystal ball. We didn't have a crystal ball that Apple and others would change Google would change their privacy policies and get a lot more restrictive on third-party data. We actually built our audience graph for other purposes, but today we sit on top of such a strategic asset that incorporates the ecosystem of Disney. And that includes, the interesting thing about that is our audience graph includes all of the ACR television data. So it's not just about looking at CTV in a microcosm. It's really thinking about consumer touch points and how do we bring all that we see from a Disney enterprise perspective together. And we're talking hundreds of millions of device IDs that don't rely on third-party cookies. And then from there, and I referenced it earlier, it's amazing to see, by the way, also the acceptance of first-party data by clients, because we have spent the last 2 to 3 years
pressure testing that, right? Really studying the impact of first party data versus third party. The recency of the data that we can provide is so real time. And so, and also our data store has almost 2,000 segments in it. So, and it's enhanced, you know, to Krista's point, it's enhanced with other third party, right? So whether that's geolocation data, et cetera, we want to keep enriching the data sets that we think can be really helpful in driving. We know the results that come from it. And I would say it's used for targeting, and that's sort of the primary way, but it's also used to inform strategy, right? So it really allows us to be a lot more consultative with clients about whether that's integrations, D2C brands. I think, you know, to your point, Danny, they were really the brands that built Hulu. Hulu was built on D2C. And you think about a lot of brands like yourself that weren't able to really break into the linear ecosystem. You know, just the attribution metrics, which by the way, I think are at the end of the day are the North Star for all of us. It's really about return and on investment. And we really built that business on that. So how do we continue to allow our data to be available frankly, across all of our screens in more sophisticated ways?
Obviously, data and targeting is a massive part of the interest around CTV, but I think sometimes what gets lost in the conversations is like the creative and how the creative also needs to be looked at differently. You know, Danny, I'm curious from Dropbox's standpoint, how you're evaluating and thinking about creative execution on CTV.
So I think, again, formerly we would go into planning and develop, here's our 60, here's our 30, here are the cut downs. In an ideal world, we would be able to create them to their bespoke channels, but that's not often the case. So I think recognizing, taking a step back and looking, where is our largest investment? Where do we plan to really hedge our bets forward? And I think building the creative to that specific medium, it has been really helpful for us. So the traditional commercial no longer really stands. I think thinking about these snackable 6s, 15s that are really attention grabbing is where we've seen a lot of success and have been able to spark interest in driving, you know, folks away from the platform or, you know, to our site.
And would you say, Danny, the price of entry is also more palatable? Like I
Yes.
feel like we do a lot of really interesting, really successful, but also just really fun integrations into our shows with brands. We had a retailer launch their brand in the D'Amelio show. Now I'm not like, you know, don't survey me about the D'Amelios because I'm out of the demo, but we sold their line out, I think in like 24 hours. It was a crazy story. You know, and I think there are so many examples of that, Janine, to your point, that even go beyond, like, I feel like pause and binge have become like standard in CTV. It's like, what's that next portfolio of ad products? But then there's also this opportunity to get into the script and get into the shows and really, you know, move the needle. And that's what we're excited about.
Lisa, why is there more an opportunity to do that in this environment than maybe historically there's been in linear TV? I mean, there's always been product placement and things like that for sure, but why do you think it is different?
I mean, look, it's a really big business for us on the linear side, for sure. I mean, you think about franchises like Modern Family and Blackish and The Bachelor, they are rich with integrations. But the price of entry is it's a significant one. And so for D2C brands, you know, this becomes, I think CTV as a starting point becomes a really interesting and maybe more palatable entrance into integrations. And so, and especially when we think about those brands and their need for attribution, real-time metrics, what we're seeing is brands like a Dropbox or others might come into Hulu, take advantage of the data targeting, but then upgrade to do more sophisticated creative work, but in-show integrations, out-integrations, bonus episodes, things like that. And they see how it can also drive their business.
So I just think it's an easier starting point. And when you look at the demos, right, CTV is younger. They're predominantly cordless. We see the same thing, Danny, that you were talking about. So, you know, when you think about combining television and CTV, there's a whole incremental story there. And sometimes the price points, I think, are more palatable, you know, as a starting point.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk a little bit about everyone's favorite topic these days, measurement. It's definitely a hot button topic in the industry. What is the state of measurement in the CTV space? Krista, do you want to start with this?
Yeah, I will. I just, before we dive into measurement, I want to build off of something that Lisa just said, because it actually just makes me think about all of the commerce opportunities available within CTV and the consumer habits that we see from younger viewers, or from any of us who have teenagers and see that shopping happening in real time across all of their devices. If we step back and say, well, let's put that consumer first and give them an opportunity to opt into an experience, think about how you can interrupt a normal viewing experience with an opportunity to actually buy someone's outfit. If, you know, the D'Amelios, what Charlie might be wearing that day, and say, hey, you want to give me your attention on this? If you opt into this buying experience, the value exchange coming back to that could be a promotion code. And then the onus is on us from a technology standpoint to make sure that that commerce experience is as seamless as it is if we're going through a DTC or an e-commerce experience on our desktop or our mobile device. And that's where I think there's going to be a lot more advancement in CTV, is our ability to actually transact on a larger screen with the ease of use that we do on our other devices. We're actually going to be announcing a little bit more along those lines in the next few weeks. So watch the space on that, but we're super excited about how value exchange can play into a broader CTV environment and giving me something back for the time that I invest in the marketing message. And that alone then has this outcome on how I can better measure my activities and my investments in CTV. I think we still have a lot to learn relative to the measurement space. We personally do a lot along the lines of not just upper funnel reach and brand lift, but looking at more lower funnel metrics that are more outcome based. So the more creative we can be with CTAs within our CTV creative, the more effective our back end measurement is. So the beauty for us is that CTV is highly measurable, and with a value exchange advertising experience, we know real time the point of consumer engagement and how they're interacting with the creative that we're presenting to them.
Lisa, to you on measurement, what are some of the challenges the industry is navigating right now and making sure that, all eyeballs are counted, and how does, measurement around CTV play into that?
Well, I'm not going to say anything out of school when I say measurement is broken, because it is a conversation that we are literally all having in real time. You cannot look left or right without, a conversation on this front. But I actually think it presents a huge opportunity, right? And counting is the baseline. We are spending so much time in the industry right now talking about counting that it makes me crazy. And look, we are testing with everybody as it relates to counting, right? Reach and frequency across every screen, which is ultimately what the marketer wants. I want my baseline to reflect. And by the way, that means Amazon, Google, Facebook, social platforms, Disney, everybody, it's everything. It's total reach and frequency that needs to be counted, if you will. And so there's a number of obviously players, as you know, that are trying to create alternatives to the Nielsen currency. You have Nielsen, who's trying to out themselves with Nielsen One and really try and be innovative. And for us, we are in all of that, and we have to be, right? We have to be testing we have to be pushing. We have to also be in business with Nielsen and have a seat at the table at some of their new work that's going to be coming in the next 2 to 3 years. What I love about the work with Nielsen One is we have folks like Google at the table very early on, and not just the traditional media companies. So that's counting. And then there's results. And for us, we really want to accelerate past counting to results. And CTV is actually fueling a lot of that. We built our own attribution tool at Hulu that, again, was adopted at scale with the D2C brands. And we're now expanding that across all of Disney, because at the end of the day, and you guys all know this, clients want to understand the impact, right? I put something out in front of consumers today. What was the impact on that? And did it move the needle? And so there's a lot of work that we're doing. And by the way, from an attribution standpoint, it's different from category to category. So the tools we need for automotive look very differently than the foot traffic and some of the other tooling needed for, say, quick service restaurants. And so I like our toolkit because it really spans, not only a Disney approach, but a vertical approach as well. And it'll be interesting to see where we net out. The one thing I'll end on as it relates to measurement is scale is a must. And right now you look at all of these options, and I kind of started going through it, and asking the question. So how many campaigns can you measure? Can you count on a quarterly basis? We're talking like a dozen, 20, 30, we're in the business of tens of thousands of campaigns. So I think we're in the early stages. My sense is it will not be one. My sense is it's going to be 1+. You might have your currency, but then you have all of these other measurement layers that, people are going to need to run their businesses. So that's just our take.
I want to circle back to the commerce opportunities. I know we've touched on a bit, but Danny, I wanted you to weigh in a bit about what Dropbox is looking for as it relates to the ability to actually potentially transact in these environments.
Mm-hmm. So I think it's an interesting one because, as we mentioned, D2C products were kind of the formulator, right? And so then Dropbox is it's SaaS, it's storage as a solution. It's not something you can really touch or feel. So how do we make a compelling ad that wants someone to see or feel or engage with this? And I think that this is a really unique time for us as a brand as we shift an ad perception to what we can do. So Dropbox definitely doesn't have an awareness problem. We have a perception problem. So that presents a unique challenge for us because much like, Coca-Cola as, the behemoth, people have heard of Dropbox, but they might not know what they should hire us for or use us for. So we need to really double down and take that one step forward. And so frequency is really how we can do that. We know that in order to shift, a consumer's mind, we have to connect with them at least 5 to 7 times to really have them take action or have that shift. So CTV is a really unique environment where we can do that across a variety of different, ad formats, but particularly in the QR code. This is something that we're starting to experiment with, is how can we actually drive someone to site to potentially learn more. And we recognize that, buying a cloud storage solution isn't something that is going to be a direct action, but it's really that cultivation of getting in front of that person multiple times and having them take that action to learn more. So we see that as a really large opportunity for us as we continue to add perception to what we do.
I'm fascinated by QR codes and the future of them in the TV landscape. After the Super Bowl, I don't think you can escape the idea of the potential of a QR code. So I think that's definitely one that...
Don't you think, Janine, I mean, just as a personal aside, COVID, everything was a QR code, right? Just to go to dinner, everything is now. So
application in TV is just, to me, not one, it's the last one in a range of ways that people have been using QR codes, whether during the pandemic or before. And I just think in TV itself, the idea of utilizing QR codes in commercials or in other ways is just an interesting application at this point. Before I get to my next question, I do want to remind those who are watching, if you have questions, to put them in the Q&A. In a few minutes, we will open it up for questions, but just a reminder to everyone to submit those. So Lisa, you had mentioned early on about the different types of genres. You talked about movies and, I think a lot of time when we think about connected TV, we're talking about episodic programming, not necessarily thinking about like those other genres. You talked a bit about the opportunities around movies. What other genres are you thinking about how to evolve like the ad experience?
Yeah, well, I think you're going to see us innovate on pause and binge for sure. There's something like billions of pauses that happen every single month. And so how do you take that behavior, right, and continue to innovate on top of it, right? So what does a commerce experience look like inside of, a pause ad, right? That could be not disruptive, but relevant, can have data attached to it. So you're going to see, I think, a lot more happening with some of those formats that were launched that I think we can be a lot more sophisticated on. I do think the longer form, like definitely film will be coming this year. You'll see a lot more around that. You'll see a lot more sponsorship type opportunities and longer form commercial creative coming into the mix. We're doing branded entertainment. Like there's a lot more, I think, coming from brands that want to be a part of the story. When we launched the Ford Bronco during the pandemic, our ability to hire talent. We hired photographers from Nat Geo, we hired ESPN, different talent across the ecosystem. That's great content, right? It was brought to you by Ford, but it had real value for consumers, some of the longer forms. So I think you're going to see us really stretch outside of the traditional video format and present entertainment to clients, in really interesting ways. And you'll see us do a lot more in CTV as it relates to inclusion marketing. So that's another really big area of exploration for us. So again, I think it's taking the signals from the market that brands certainly need their media to work harder for them, but they want to be injected into the content and into the storyline as much as possible. And look, for things that have to be turned around in 24 hours, 48 hours, that's where binge and pause and gateway can be workhorses. But for folks that have a little bit more lead time and really want to tie into big cultural moments, there is endless possibility in terms of how brands can be part of the stories. And we want to do a lot more of that work at Hulu with Greenhouse, and our other brands as well.
Great. I want to bring in some questions from the audience. We're talking a lot, obviously, about D2C brands and how they've sort of paved the way in connected TV. But what business sectors are you seeing take advantage of CTV now?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to jump into that. I'm loving seeing what financial services is doing in this space, and even pharma and some more regulated and complex industries that are taking advantage of things like engagement experiences or the opportunity to capture consumers' attention and offer some points of interaction with an advertising experience. So whether that is a poll or whether it's just a deeper dive into understanding the nuances of a financial services product, or giving people the opportunity to navigate around an advertising experience based on their personal needs. I think that we're finding that some more of the traditional industries are getting very creative in how to access the technological advancements that have come with a value exchange advertising experience, especially as it applies to the CTV environment. My sense is that we're going to see even more of that, especially with the likes of highly regulated industries that need need a broader footprint, if you will, in how they're expressing their messages. So we're really excited about a couple of those categories, in addition to more traditional categories like auto, where my buying experience might be real time during the CTV viewing experience. I can actually play around with the car that I want to build, et cetera, on a large screen. That's going to be a much more memorable and interactive investment for the brand if they're able to serve up those type of creative and memorable, like I said, memorable creative formats.
Danny, we have a question for you. For Dropbox, what percentage of the budget is CTV driven versus other media?
Ooh, off the top of my head, I would say, I mean, we kind of look at online video and then we sector it out that way. So I would say about 65 to 70% of our budget is spent that way.
The next question is looking at younger viewers and how to engage them. Teenagers don't tolerate ad interruptions well. How are you managing this challenge and keeping them? What types of messages tend to keep them from tuning out?
I think it goes back, Janine, to the data piece. And I think the more that we can use data and when I say data, I mean beyond base demo data, really using sophisticated targeting, which makes the ads a lot more relevant. I also think lighter ad loads, frequency management, really important. When folks ask me, I had this experience, I said, okay, where did you see the ad? I saw the ad, was it through a Roku device? Was it on Hulu Live? Was it through one of our partnerships who also like an NBC or, there's so many different ways into CTV. It's not as simple as, oh, did you see it on ABC, at 8 o'clock on Monday night? No, that is a web, right? It's a webbed question. So I think the more that we can be conscious of the viewing experience, lighter ad loads, better frequency management, targetability, and surprise and delights, right? So those ads that I do think clients more and more are asking, how do I have a unique strategy? And by the way, many of them don't. Right. So the real is we get most 15s and 30s from clients that are their general market traditional spots. And so how do we continue to push and continue to accelerate? Because when you do those integrations and they are authentic, they're home runs. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would just build on that too, to say, obviously the younger population are early adopters of all technology, right? And we also all know that our teenagers are sitting on the couch with their other screens. So they are the first generation of the dual screen viewing experience. So when creative starts to incorporate things like augmented reality or voice activated engagements in a advertising experience, the younger people are going to engage with that much faster than anyone else because it's the life that they know, right? Total early adoption on anything new. And to me, that's the pressure test for brands right now is, and I get it, having been on the brand side for a long time, you're trying to capitalize on your creative investments as best you can across multiple platforms. But for sure, you're going to see higher levels of engagement when you start integrating these type of technological advancements for a younger audience, when you're taking full advantage of that dual screen experience. And we've seen that quite a bit with some of our voice activated campaigns that we've run for companies and really fun things that introduce AR into the overall viewing experience. Now you've got my teenager's attention, which God knows I can't get her attention. So if a brand can do it, that's even better.
I want to stay with frequency for just a second. Lisa, maybe you can just jump in on like what solutions are being, made and how you're sort of looking to fix the problem, because I do think probably one of the biggest complaints, and just on a personal level that I even deal with, is like just seeing the same ad over and over. How is the industry working to fix that?
Yeah, I mean, we're pretty transparent about our frequency caps. We set them. We get a lot of guidance from brands who also have their own. I think, Danny, you were saying, right, what the frequency is for your brand, that sweet spot. And so how does that then connect into in our case, you know, the ecosystem of Hulu, and how do we continue to monitor that? We monitor it on a quarterly basis. We have very stringent rules in place to ensure that, you know, we are keeping track of that. It's also really important too, in that whole situation, to control your ad inventory as much as possible, right? And we control about 99% of our inventory. We do have some strategic partnerships with distribution partners that play into that inventory. But it's also, when those situations happen, it's really important to, because a user is not, you know, someone that's not in the media industry, right? Like maybe it's one of your kids, or maybe it's a neighbor. They're not saying, oh, I just watched this on a Roku device, and then I went to my ABC app, which is not Hulu. It's just content. And so, or Hulu Live, and then I went on to the Hulu app and the experience was different. So it's a very complex, complicated ecosystem to manage. I don't want to make it sound like we set frequency controls and we let it go and it's perfect. It's never perfect, but we really have to be on top of it. And we really have to be willing to dial it up or down, you know, over time as we get user feedback, which we have our ear to the ground on as it relates to that.
Danny, maybe you could take the next one. In regards to creative, how are you working with your agencies now? How much is through an agency and how much is in-house?
It's a great question. I think it really depends on the approach, right? So if we're going into building a campaign, we will typically work with our external creative agency, but usually we strike up a hybrid model where we include some of our internal design teams, just because if we are on a time crunch, having kind of that like historical institutional knowledge from our designers and folks usually makes the process a bit easier. But we use a mix, but typically it is with an external agency.
Do you see seasonality and or world events impacting the planning in CTV? What are some of the big events you anticipate will impact the use of CTV for brands in the next year?
I mean, I can just give you since we sort of live in real-time culture. One of the biggest benefits, both in, I would say CTV, but even if you go a layer down, programmatic. So when you plan for traditional digital or traditional linear, you don't take advantage of the spikes. And if anybody out there are sports fans and you've lived through the postseason of NFL and college basketball, which just wrapped, you know, this past week, you understand what happens in the last 10 minutes of a game. Some of your most valuable impressions can be had with consumers and fans on the other side in those moments. And so CTV, and more specifically, programmatic CTV, allows that control in the buyer's hand. Now we have to train traders in terms of how to buy sports, how to buy cultural entertainment in a CTV, in a programmatic environment. But that's the gold that you don't get when you set television schedules that are supposed to run evenly throughout the course of, you know, a certain flight. By the time the weekend comes, the majority of those impressions have been delivered already. And so it's not easy to predict. There's a ton of education to happen, but we're seeing brands get a lot more sophisticated, especially the brands that have those capabilities in-house, to truly want to take advantage of those spikes.
I think brands start to need to hold both publishers and advertising technology companies accountable for this. It's complex technology, but the opportunity from our dynamic creative optimization and real-time messaging within live news, live sports, live entertainment environment is there for us, and it's enabled by CTV. So to me, that's one of the more exciting tailwinds of this particular platform. But like, we all have massive engineering teams behind the scenes trying to figure out the technical complexities of everything that we're talking about here, overlaid with data, right? And overlaid with the need for measurement systems. So it is early days. Like we've been talking OTT for a while, but the technical nuances, there's still a tremendous amount for us to explore, and brands should be holding us accountable for delivering on that.
And we have one more question. I think this is a great one to end on, and it would be great for each of you to quickly weigh in on this. As leaders in the industry, what advice would you give young pros coming into the business today? Maybe Danny, do you want to start? We could go down the line.
Sure. I think something that I've harnessed over the years is just having empathy and thinking about the advertising and marketing industry from all different angles. So I've had a unique experience where I started my career at an agency. I've worked on the publisher side, and now I'm on the client side. And so having that vantage point and understanding the relationships, that it's very much about collaboration and really empathy across all sides is something that I would advise for most folks.
Krista?
Yeah, I mean, I love that. And we all have jigged and jagged our careers. And I've had, you know, brand side, agency, publisher. I did some reverse engineering along the way. But by the way, it's definitely the advice that I would give everybody, because it gives you perspective. And perspective is not something that can be learned. It can only be experienced. The only other point that I would make is, in our industry, and we started at the top of the call on this, of talking about CTV as a shiny new toy, we have to catch ourselves of not getting overly drawn into the hype in such a way that it distracts us from the broader opportunities. I think anybody entering this industry right now has to be endlessly curious and focus on the fact that they're also consumers. So when you think about what we're building, sometimes we have to step back and watch it through the lens of, what do we want to experience? You know, what is incenting me to act on a brand? What are we seeing our colleagues and our friends and our family do? And always leading with that perspective is, I actually think, what informs more success as an individual in this industry.
Great. And Lisa?
So diversity of skill is what I would have said. It makes everybody on the screen has it, and that's what makes these women such marketable, successful women. The other thing that I hear a lot of lately, and look, I think we've all been successful in this industry thus far because of the networking, relationships, and connections we've had to people. Yes, you've got to be smart, you've got to have expertise, you've got to have the skills, but don't diminish the power of connections. And when I hear young people, especially right now, pushing for, can I work from home forever? And by the way, we want to be very flexible on that, myself included. But my career sitting in this room, I love the wallpaper, but I got to tell you, at some point I'm going to get sick of it, and I want to be back with people. And that is as much career fuel as the business side of it. And I just I try to encourage and paint that picture for that next generation, or maybe 2 generations down coming up, how critical that is for themselves, for their own personal brands. So that would be just something to keep in mind as well.
Great point.
Great. Thank you all for joining us. This was a great conversation. I appreciate it. And I'm sure everyone watching got some really great takeaways. If you have any questions, you can reach out to the advertisingclub.org. And on behalf of all of us today, thank you for attending, everyone, and be well.
Thank you.
Thanks
so much.
Janine.
Thank you. Thanks,
everyone. Hi, Danny. Bye, Lisa.
Bye.
Bye.